Hi, in this short video, I'm going to give you a few tips on developing your assessment work by learning from the set readings for the unit and integrating them into the learning diagram that I've shown you. And I'm going to be ably assisted in this endeavour by none other than Gaz Beadle from Geordie Shore. Yes, that's right. Gaz Beadle is going to teach us to read academic literature. So what I would like you to have open for this particular lesson is if you could go to the learning diagram that's on page 15 of the unit book. And I'd also like you to go to the set readings and download an article that we've talked about a couple of times. And this is Helen Wood's The Politics of Hyperbole on Geordie Shore, Class, Gender, Youth and Excess. Now, what I've done here is I have gone to the electronic guides, and I have downloaded this on my computer as preview, but I've downloaded it into some sort of software where you can actively search and annotate what we're doing here. And what I'm going to teach you to do is build on your early efforts to find a topic that you might want to research for this unit. So we're up at this bit on the unit guide, I guess. And try and move on to this section where we learn to explain why the things that we're interested in are interesting from an academic point of view. And this is where Gary is going to help us. So the first thing we've talked about is Gary as and the show Geordie Shore as something that's pretty interesting. It's certainly very interesting that a show about a group of people from the Northeast has become a global hit because the Northeastern English accent is not something that global audiences would be used to hearing. For a long time, you couldn't hear it in BBC and in UK broadcasting. So it's a relative newcomer to the media world, if you like. So it's quite amazing that a show with a Geordie cast would become an international hit 20 years ago. No one would have probably imagined that would happen. But the other thing we've kind of said is that we look at this and we've kind of got this inkling that this has got something to do with celebrity culture, what it is, how it works, and why it matters. So now what we have to do is test our thinking. We have to see, look, is there a way that we could really write a serious academic piece of work about this guy? So we're moving on to this. Why is this interesting? And the first place we can go to figure out why it's interesting, well, there are two things. The first thing we would do is read some of the ideas in the unit book on why celebrity is an important topic. And then we'd try and see how we could update and apply some of those ideas by looking at our own case study. And if we were going to do that with Geordie Shore, then we want to be looking for literature that's about Geordie Shore. And we found it here with Helen Wood. Now, Helen Wood's one of the things that we learn when we become more experienced at navigating academic reading is it's good to know something about, if it's possible, it isn't always possible, but it's good to know something about the person who is writing what you are reading. And Helen Wood is a very interesting character in this regard because she's done a lot of work that talks about television as something that we live with. It's a part of our environment that we interact with. She's keen to point out that we don't simply watch television, we talk to it, we talk through it. It's part of a living conversation, living social conversation that we have. So she's very much thinking about how television shows become part of our material culture, they become part of our everyday life. And she's turned her attention to Geordie Shore. So what we have to do is we have to figure out, when we're looking at a piece of work like this, we're being strategic. We're not so much saying, well, what does Helen Wood think about Geordie Shore? We're thinking something slightly different. We're thinking, how can I use Helen Wood's work to explain why Geordie Shore is an interesting example of youthful celebrity, and how does this help explain the reality effect of media. So the first thing we do is we read this abstract, and what we notice is it's pretty hard going, I guess. And this is the test that we have before us as students. We have to be able to take this abstract, and we have to explain what it means to say that aesthetic, physical, and discursive features of excess represent hyperbole produced from within an effective situation of precariousness and rooted through the labour relations of media visibility. Hyper-glamour, hyper-sex, and hyper-emotion are responses to the ideologies of the future-projected, self-governing neoliberal subject. And we look at that and we go, wow, okay, so what's that about? And I think that one way of cutting through this is to step back a little bit and think about, well, what's the underlying influence? What's the underlying idea here? How can we use the idea of celebrity to unpack this? So the first thing I'm doing if I'm looking at this is I'm thinking, well, how can I integrate this in an essay on celebrity? And the very first thing that you should do in any essay on celebrity over here is explain what celebrity is. What is celebrity as an academic construct? So if we were to look at this, we would see a couple of things. I'm going to suggest that what this abstract is really saying, and certainly what you find if you read further into the piece, is that Geordie Shore and the way that its characters behave on screen reflects the changing economic and social circumstances of young people in the UK and young people in general in what she calls neoliberal societies. I guess by that she means societies where the state is rolling itself back, where the political onus is very much on people learning to care for themselves, be responsible for their own futures. And the fact that that's created kind of a precariousness in youth life. So, you know, for example, when I was a young person, people thought that they would get into a career at 21, 22, and they'd pretty much be in that career for their lives. And now what we hear is that young people are probably going to have at least 2 or 3 career changes in their lives. And so they have a kind of precariousness in their economic futures that's a reality that they face that's unique to their generation. And the only way that's really been projected to handle this is young people are being encouraged to be entrepreneurial, to look after themselves, to think about their abilities in flexible ways, to think about how they can make the most of opportunities available to them. And something about the appeal of Geordie Shore relates to that somehow. So that's the broad kind of reality effect, I guess, in terms of saying that Geordie Shore has got something to do with the economic reality of global youth. But also we want to think about how we can talk about this in terms of celebrity. So if I'm sitting down and reading this, I'm not going to go, right, what does, I'm just going to read this from beginning to end and get my yellow highlighter out and underline all the bits that are relevant. I'm going to think about, well, what do I want to know from this? And the first thing I want to know on an essay in celebrity is, what's celebrity? So I'm just going up to the search function here. And what I've found is this highlights everything, everywhere where Wood talks about celebrity. Okay, so we have 4 different forms of 4 or 5 different places where people are talking about celebrity. And this really tells us, this gives us an indication of how we can begin to use this in an active way that's going to help us not just in understanding these units, but also these readings, but also writing our essays. So let's have a look down here. So obviously we're not just going to read this, we're going to read the entire paragraph. So what we see here is that Geordie Shore is seen as, quote, a part of a third generation of reality television, which builds on the increasing media knowingness of both participants and audiences. So this is pretty interesting, because what it tells us is, now before we come to this, we will have read our basic readings, our Turners and our Rojecks and our Cashmores on what celebrity is. But this actually suggests that there are different formats of celebrity, and there's this what's called a third generation of celebrity, which is characterized by a different attitudes towards authenticity and a different sort of relationship between participants and audiences, which is based on kind of knowing that media, that reality television isn't really about reality at all, but it's about what we would call excess. It's actually about being as unreal as you possibly can be. Now, there's a long history of this. It's really quite interesting. If you went back and read the work of a scholar called Richard Dyer, he talks about popular culture in the 70s and 80s as also being about excess. The point is that you want to be entertained. You don't want to see people who are like you on television. You want to see people who are having a fantastic, excessive, pleasurable time. They're either in the depths of despair or the heights of ecstasy. They're living a kind of a spectacular life. And that was always the element of popular culture. And similarly, the argument here is that that's become the format of reality television. Good reality television in this third generation is about being excessive. It's not about being realistic at all. And this changes a whole range of ways that we think about reality television. And this largely explains why it's worth paying attention to the things that the cast on Geordie Shore do to their bodies, do to each other, all of these sorts of things. I mean, they live incredibly excessive lives, don't they? They're constantly drinking excessively or having sex excessively or taking incredible risks with their bodies. And this actually also is an example of one of the defining features of celebrity that Chris Rojek talks about, which is about the characteristic of celebrity being that they lead excessive, risk-filled lives that the rest of us are too afraid or too poor to live. Now, the other thing that's worth noting here, so we focus in on here, and what you can see is that by attacking this directly and asking what celebrity is and how Geordie Shore represents a particular kind of celebrity, and significantly also what we're seeing here is the idea that Geordie Shore is worth paying attention to, because it's a very sort of high profile example of a shift in a particular in the nature of celebrity. The other thing we would do is we'd look at this here. So you see that she's getting this, citation procedure. So she's put this a third celebrity generation of reality television, which builds on the increased media knowingness of participants and audiences. We have a citation here, Kafka, 2012. And so we think, oh, well, there's something else here that might be worth reading. Now, the big problem here is we have to make sure it's an academic text, right? Is this another piece of scholarly work, or is it just a quote that she picked up from a newspaper? So what we do is we go all the way to the end to references. We look up Kafka. And we see this person has written a lot about reality television, and particularly reality TV and the gender and the politics of flaunting. So we think to ourselves, well, here's a couple of articles that might be worth looking up later. Right? So what we do here is we use this to develop a particular definition of celebrity and apply it to Gaz Beadle. Does it fit Gaz Beadle? Absolutely. This notion of the excessive reality television star actually absolutely fits in. Another thing that we might look at is the notion of authenticity, because we know that that's a feature of celebrity. So we know that authenticity is a mark of celebrity, and that will have been explained in the lecture. But here what we see is that authenticity takes on a special definition, which is connected with these notions of animation and hyperbole. And if you read into this, what Wood is saying is that the sort of authenticity that we find on Geordie Shore is really about being as performative and, if you like, inauthentic as possible. That is, everything has to be exaggerated. The emotions, the looks, the reactions to situations, everything needs to be exaggerated, because the celebrities on Geordie Shore understand that what they're doing is a performance. It's something that has to be excessive. So one of the things that's quite interesting about the women on the show, for example, is they talk about embracing the fake look. If you think about someone like Holly, she takes great pride in the artificiality of her appearance, the the tan in a part of England where the sun never shines, quite frankly, and everything else to do with the hair, the nails, everything to do with the body. So what we see then is that this particular article and the image of Gary and his co-stars on Geordie Shore, they actually allow us to make a really important shift. So we start off with Gary Beadle, and at this point we're talking about Gary Beadle's fame has got something to do with the issue of celebrity, why celebrity is important. And one of the ideas you will have been introduced to in the seminar is the idea that celebrity reflects the functioning of certain kinds of media content. So celebrities, their persona that they adopt in public, has something to do with the genre within which they work. So, for example, David Beckham is David Beckham because of the changing nature of football as a form of media entertainment in the mid to late 1990s. Similarly, what we're told in this article is the infamy of Gary Beadle has something to do with the fact that he has a celebrity persona that somehow reflects a particular style of celebrity, which also reflects a particular shift in media genres, the emergence of this kind of third wave of reality television. So Gary Beadle, so we've got kind of the general idea of celebrity. Celebrity is something that tells us about how media industries work and how their work occupies the social imagination. But then we want to be more specific than that, because what you don't want to be doing is writing a general kind of essay about broad, very, very broad themes in celebrity studies, because that way it's easy to get really, really vague. So what you want to do is you want to latch on to a couple of different ideas in celebrity. So, for example, the notion of one of the reasons why it's worth talking about Gary Beadle is he allows us to talk about a certain form of excess that is characteristic of third generation celebrity related to a particular form of reality television. And then what you would do is you would go off and you would read far more about the functioning of celebrity within reality television to round that out. So what you're doing is you're taking the basic ideas about celebrity from the unit guide, from the unit reading, from people like Cashmore and Turner and Rojek, from the book that I've written. And then you're actually trying to develop it in a very specific way around a very specific case study. So you're choosing a case study that allows you to connect with a couple of ideas within the broad theory. In this case, changing notions of authenticity related to reality television. And when you've done all that, you're a good way on your way to writing the essay, because you've started off by saying, Gary Beadle, why does he get so much attention? Isn't that interesting? Something to do with celebrity, something more specifically to do with the celebrity attached to developments in reality television. So this is why it makes sense to look at Gary Beadle. And that's how you figure out whether your case study is workable from an academic point of view, by connecting your case study with the key readings.